The mahogany conference table gleamed under the soft lighting of Whitmore and Associates' executive boardroom. 23 floors above downtown Seattle, I adjusted my tailored navy suit and watched the rain streak against the floor-to-ceiling windows. My phone buzzed with yet another call from home, the seventh one this morning. I declined it without looking at the caller ID.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Miss Sophia Chen Morrison, my assistant Marcus announced through the intercom, your parents are here for their 11:30 appointment. A slow smile crossed my face as I opened the thick manila folder on my desk. Inside were financial documents that would change everything: loan applications, credit reports, and most importantly, the foreclosure notice that had been filed against the family home 3 days ago. The same house where, 6 months earlier, my parents had sat me down in the living room and delivered news that shattered my world. But let me start from the beginning, before the boardrooms and the power suits, back when I was just Sophia Morrison, the overlooked middle daughter in a family that worshipped perfection. Growing up in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, our house on Maple Street was the picture of middle-class success. Dad, Richard Morrison, worked as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company. Mom, Patricia, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. My older sister Melissa was the golden child, homecoming queen, valedictorian, the daughter who could do no wrong. My younger brother Jake was the baby, the charming athlete who got away with everything. And then there was me, Sophia, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who helped Mom with grocery shopping, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who never caused drama or demanded attention. I was the daughter they took for granted, the one they assumed would always be there, steady and reliable, like furniture. From the time I was 12, I had been obsessed with my college fund. Every birthday, every Christmas, every odd job babysitting the neighbors' kids, half of everything went into that account. I watched the balance grow from hundreds to thousands, dreaming of attending Northwestern University's journalism program. I had spreadsheets tracking my savings, college brochures taped to my bedroom walls, and a countdown calendar marking the days until I could escape to Chicago and start my real life. By senior year of high school, I had accumulated $73,000 in my college fund. Dad had opened the account when I was 8, and we had both contributed to it religiously for nearly 10 years. It was our special project, our father-daughter bond. Every month, he would show me the bank statements, explaining compound interest and the importance of long-term planning. "This is your ticket to independence, Sophie," he would say. "Education is the one thing no one can ever take away from you." I believed him completely. The first crack in my perfect family facade appeared during the spring of my senior year. Melissa had been dating Brandon Caldwell since college, a pretentious finance major whose father owned 3 car dealerships across Oregon. Brandon was everything my parents admired: wealthy, ambitious, and completely devoted to their precious eldest daughter. When he proposed on Melissa's birthday with a 5-carat diamond ring, my mother cried happy tears for 3 days straight. The wedding planning began immediately. Melissa wanted everything to be perfect. The venue had to be the exclusive Riverdale Country Club, the dress had to be designer, the flowers had to be imported from Holland. The initial budget was $45,000, which seemed reasonable for a family that had been saving for years. But Melissa had expensive taste, and Brandon's family had expectations. The guest list grew from 150 to 300. The reception moved from the country club's smaller ballroom to the grand hall. The photographer wasn't just any photographer. It had to be the one who shot celebrities. The band wasn't just any band. It had to be the 12-piece orchestra that played at society weddings. By March, the wedding budget had ballooned to $95,000. I remember the night everything changed. I was in my room working on my Northwestern application essay when I heard raised voices from the kitchen. Dad was on the phone with someone, his voice tight with stress. "No, I understand the payment is due next week, but we need more time. The medical bills from Patricia's surgery last year cleaned us out more than we expected." I crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear. Mom had needed emergency gallbladder surgery the previous summer, and even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs had been substantial. But I thought they had handled it. Richard, we have to make this work, Mom was whispering frantically. Melissa's already sent the invitations. Brandon's family will be devastated if we have to downgrade now. You know how important this is. I know, Patricia, but where are we supposed to get another $50,000? We've already borrowed against the house, used up our savings, maxed out 2 credit cards. What about Sophia's college fund? The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they might hear it downstairs. Absolutely not, Dad said firmly. That money is for her education. We've been building that fund for 10 years. Richard, be realistic. Sophia's smart, but she's not Northwestern material. Her SAT scores are good, not great. She could easily go to Portland State or even community college for the first 2 years. She's practical. She'll understand. Patricia? And honestly, what's she going to do with a journalism degree anyway? The industry is dying. She'd be better off studying something practical, maybe business or accounting. She could start at the community college, work part-time, figure out what she really wants to do. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. In the kitchen, Dad was silent for a long moment. It's just temporary, Mom continued, her voice gaining confidence. We can pay it back after the wedding, once things settle down. Melissa only gets married once, Richard. This is our chance to give her the perfect day she's dreamed of since she was little. What about Sophia's dreams? Sophia is 18. She has her whole life to figure out her dreams. Melissa is 26. This is her time. The conversation ended with Dad agreeing to think about it, but I knew the decision had already been made. I crept back to my room, shut the door, and stared at my Northwestern acceptance letter pinned to the bulletin board above my desk. 3 weeks later, they called me downstairs for a family meeting. Melissa was there too, glowing with bridal excitement, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically about flower arrangements and menu tastings. Sophia, honey, Dad began, not quite meeting my eyes, we need to talk to you about college. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. Okay. There have been some unexpected expenses this year, Mom jumped in, shooting a meaningful look at Dad. The medical bills, some issues with the house that needed immediate attention, and of course, Melissa's wedding. The wedding is going to be absolutely gorgeous, Melissa gushed, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Sophie, you should see the dress I picked out for you as a maid of honor. It's this beautiful sage green that will look amazing with your skin tone.
Anyway, Dad continued, clearing his throat awkwardly, we've had to make some difficult financial decisions. We're going to need to borrow from your college fund temporarily, just until we can get back on our feet. The word borrow hung in the air like a lie we all knew wasn't true. How much? I asked quietly. Mom and Dad exchanged another look. Well, most of it, Mom admitted. But Sophie, you're so resourceful and responsible, you can take a gap year, work for a while, reapply next year when we've had time to rebuild the fund. Or you could start at Portland Community College, Dad added hopefully. Get your general requirements out of the way for much less money, then transfer to a 4-year school later. I looked around the room at my family. Melissa was scrolling through something on her phone, probably more wedding planning apps. Mom was watching me with an expression that was part guilt, part defiance. Dad looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. All of it? I asked. The entire $73,000? Now, Sophie, don't be dramatic, Mom said sharply. We're not taking it, we're borrowing it. This is what families do. They help each other out during important times. Melissa's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event, Dad added. Your education can wait a year or 2. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. 10 years of saving. 10 years of dreaming. 10 years of being the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything. Okay, I said finally. Mom's face flooded with relief. Oh, Sophie, thank you for understanding. You're such a good sister. Melissa finally looked up from her phone.
This is going to be the most amazing wedding ever, and Sophie, I promise I'll make it up to you somehow. I smiled and nodded and played the role they expected: the understanding daughter, the supportive sister, the one who would sacrifice her dreams so others could live theirs. But inside, something had shifted. Something cold and calculating had taken root in my chest, and I was already making plans of my own. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next morning, I walked into the guidance counselor's office at school and asked for a meeting. Mrs. Henderson, my guidance counselor, had been at Lincoln High for 37 years. She had graying hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a reputation for being brutally honest with students about their prospects. Her office walls were covered with thank-you notes from graduates who had gone on to successful careers, and she knew every scholarship opportunity, grant program, and alternative pathway to higher education in the Pacific Northwest. "Sophia Morrison," she said, consulting my file as I sat across from her cluttered desk. "Northwestern Journalism Program, Early Admission Acceptance. I remember being impressed by your application essay about investigative reporting in small communities." She looked up at me with curiosity. "What brings you here? Shouldn't you be celebrating?" I had rehearsed this moment, but sitting there in her small office with the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, I almost lost my composure. "There's been a change in my family's financial situation," I said carefully. "I need to explore alternative options for college funding." Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted immediately. She had seen this before: promising students whose college dreams crumbled under economic reality. "I see. Let's talk about what we're working with. Have you applied for federal aid? State grants? What's your expected family contribution?" Over the next hour, Mrs. Henderson walked me through every possible option: work-study programs, community college transfer agreements, merit-based scholarships I might still be eligible for, even gap year programs that could strengthen my application for the following year. She made phone calls, pulled out filing cabinets full of resources, and even contacted her former colleague who now worked in Northwestern's financial aid office. But as we talked, I realized that none of these conventional paths would work for my situation. My parents made too much money for need-based aid, but they had just allocated my college fund to my sister's wedding. I would be starting from zero, competing for limited scholarship dollars against students who had been preparing for years. "There is one other option," Mrs. Henderson said slowly, pulling out a different folder. "It's unconventional, but given your academic record and your situation, it might be worth exploring." She handed me a brochure for something called the Pacific Northwest Young Entrepreneurs Program. It was a competitive initiative run by a consortium of local business leaders designed to mentor high school graduates who showed exceptional promise in business and innovation. Selected participants received a full scholarship to any participating university, plus a summer internship at a major corporation, and ongoing mentorship throughout their college years. "The catch," Mrs. Henderson explained, "is that you need to present a business plan or innovative project proposal, and you need to demonstrate real leadership potential, not just academic achievement." I stared at the brochure, reading the requirements. Applications were due in 6 weeks. The selection process included multiple rounds of interviews, a presentation to a panel of business executives, and a comprehensive background check. Only 12 students from the entire region would be selected. "Mrs. Henderson," I said slowly, "I've never taken a business class. I don't know anything about entrepreneurship or business plans." She smiled. "Sophia, you've been managing your own college savings for 10 years. You've been working part-time jobs since you were 15. You organized the school's fundraisers for the new library computers and raised more money than anyone expected. You may not have taken formal business classes, but you understand business instinctively." That afternoon, I walked home through the familiar neighborhoods of my childhood with the Entrepreneur Program brochure tucked in my backpack. The cherry trees were blooming along Maple Street, and I could see the preparations for Melissa's wedding everywhere. Delivery trucks dropping off rentals at our house, Mom on the front porch discussing flower arrangements with the florist, the general chaos of an event that was consuming our entire family's attention and resources. I slipped in through the back door and went straight to my room. For the first time since the family meeting, I allowed myself to really look at my Northwestern acceptance letter, my journalism portfolio, all the dreams and plans that had been casually discarded for the sake of my sister's perfect day. Then, I opened my laptop and began to research. Over the next 3 weeks, I became obsessed with learning everything I could about business, entrepreneurship, and investment strategies. I spent hours in the public library, reading books about successful business leaders, studying case studies of companies that had started from nothing. I watched online lectures from Wharton and Stanford business schools, took free courses in financial literacy and market analysis. But more importantly, I started to see my own life differently. Every job I had worked, babysitting, tutoring, helping at my aunt's catering business during busy weekends, had taught me valuable lessons about customer service, time management, and problem solving. The fundraiser I had organized for the school library required project management skills, vendor negotiation, and team leadership. I wasn't starting from zero. I was starting from a foundation I hadn't even recognized. The business plan I developed focused on something I knew intimately: the gap between high school graduation and college enrollment. I had researched the statistics and discovered that nearly 40% of students who planned to attend college immediately after graduation ended up deferring or never enrolling due to financial constraints or lack of preparation. My proposal was for a consulting service that would help students and families navigate college funding, application processes, and alternative pathways to higher education. I would partner with high school guidance counselors, financial aid offices, and local businesses to create comprehensive support systems for students facing the same challenges I was experiencing. The model was scalable. I could start with a few local high schools and expand regionally, eventually developing online resources and partnerships with colleges across the Pacific Northwest. I called it Bridge Educational Consulting, and I spent 2 weeks perfecting every detail of the business plan, creating financial projections, market analysis reports, and implementation timelines. Meanwhile, at home, wedding preparations intensified. The house became a staging ground for Melissa's perfect day. The garage was full of centerpieces, the dining room table was covered with seating charts and vendor contracts, and every conversation revolved around dress fittings, menu tastings, and coordination with the wedding planner. I slipped in through the back door and went straight to my room. For the first time since the family meeting, I allowed myself to really look at my Northwestern acceptance letter, my journalism portfolio, all the dreams and plans that had been casually discarded for the sake of my sister's perfect day. Then, I opened my laptop and began to research. Over the next 3 weeks, I became obsessed with learning everything I could about business, entrepreneurship, and investment strategies. I spent hours in the public library, reading books about successful business leaders, studying case studies of companies that had started from nothing. I watched online lectures from Wharton and Stanford business schools, took free courses in financial literacy and market analysis. But more importantly, I started to see my own life differently. Every job I had worked, babysitting, tutoring, helping at my aunt's catering business during busy weekends, had taught me valuable lessons about customer service, time management, and problem solving. The fundraiser I had organized for the school library required project management skills, vendor negotiation, and team leadership. I wasn't starting from zero. I was starting from a foundation I hadn't even recognized. The business plan I developed focused on something I knew intimately: the gap between high school graduation and college enrollment. I had researched the statistics and discovered that nearly 40% of students who planned to attend college immediately after graduation ended up deferring or never enrolling due to financial constraints or lack of preparation. My proposal was for a consulting service that would help students and families navigate college funding, application processes, and alternative pathways to higher education. I would partner with high school guidance counselors, financial aid offices, and local businesses to create comprehensive support systems for students facing the same challenges I was experiencing. The model was scalable. I could start with a few local high schools and expand regionally, eventually developing online resources and partnerships with colleges across the Pacific Northwest. I called it Bridge Educational Consulting, and I spent 2 weeks perfecting every detail of the business plan, creating financial projections, market analysis reports, and implementation timelines. Meanwhile, at home, wedding preparations intensified. The house became a staging ground for Melissa's perfect day. The garage was full of centerpieces, the dining room table was covered with seating charts and vendor contracts, and every conversation revolved around dress fittings, menu tastings, and coordination with the wedding planner.
I moved through this chaos like a ghost, helping when asked, but spending most of my time in my room working on my application. My parents seemed relieved that I was handling the college situation so well and not causing any additional stress during this important time for the family. They had no idea what I was actually doing. 3 days before the application deadline, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was one I hadn't heard in almost 2 years. "Sophia, this is your great-aunt Margaret, Margaret Shen." Aunt Margaret was my grandmother's younger sister, a woman who had left Oregon 40 years ago to work in the tech industry in Silicon Valley. She had never married, had built a successful career in software development, and had become something of a family legend, the relative who sent generous Christmas gifts and birthday cards, but rarely visited. "Aunt Margaret," I said, surprised. "How are you?" "I'm well, dear. I'm calling because I received some concerning information about your college plans. I spoke with your grandmother last week, and she mentioned that there had been some changes to your college fund." I felt my stomach clench. "Grandma told you about that?" "She did, and frankly, I'm disappointed in your parents. I understand that weddings are expensive, but compromising your education for the sake of one party seems short-sighted." I didn't know how to respond. In my family, we didn't criticize each other to outsiders, even family members. "Sophia, I want you to know that I've been following your academic achievements through your grandmother. She's very proud of you, and she's concerned about your future. I'd like to discuss some alternatives with you if you're interested." "What kind of alternatives?" "Well, that would be better discussed in person. I'm flying up to Portland this weekend for a business meeting. Would you be available to meet with me on Saturday afternoon?" I agreed immediately, though I had no idea what she wanted to discuss. After I hung up, I realized that Saturday was also the day of Melissa's bridal shower, an event I was expected to attend as maid of honor. For the first time in months, I made a decision that prioritized my own interests over my family's expectations. On Saturday afternoon, while my mother, sister, and 30 of their closest friends celebrated Melissa's upcoming marriage with champagne and gift opening, I met Aunt Margaret at a quiet coffee shop downtown. She was exactly as I remembered her, sharp-eyed, well-dressed, and utterly direct in her communication style. After ordering our drinks, she got straight to the point. "Sophia, I want to offer you a proposition. I've been watching your family's financial decisions from a distance, and I'm not impressed with their priorities. You're a bright young woman with tremendous potential, and I don't want to see that wasted." She opened a folder and placed several documents on the table between us. "I'm prepared to establish a private educational trust fund for you. Full tuition, room and board, and living expenses for 4 years at any accredited university in the United States. The only conditions are that you maintain a 3.5 GPA and that you graduate within 5 years. I stared at the documents, unable to process what I was hearing. "Why?" I managed to ask. Aunt Margaret smiled. "Because 40 years ago, I was in a similar situation. My parents wanted me to stay home, get married, and have children. They thought my interest in mathematics and computers was a phase I'd outgrow. When I insisted on going to college, they refused to help financially. I worked my way through school, graduated with massive debt, and spent the first 10 years of my career just trying to get back to zero." She leaned forward. "I don't want you to start your adult life at a disadvantage because your parents can't see your worth. Consider this an investment in your potential." That evening, I sat in my room staring at the trust fund paperwork while listening to my family rehash every detail of the bridal shower downstairs. Melissa was describing each gift, Mom was planning the thank you card schedule, and Dad was calculating the final headcount for the reception. No one had asked where I had been all afternoon. No one had noticed my absence from the bridal shower. I was still the invisible daughter, the one whose life could be rearranged without consultation or consequence. But now, I had options they didn't know about. I opened my laptop and submitted my application for the Pacific Northwest Young Entrepreneurs Program. Then I carefully filled out Aunt Margaret's trust fund application, detailing my academic achievements, career goals, and commitment to educational excellence. For the first time since that devastating family meeting, I felt something other than anger or resignation. I felt power. The acceptance email arrived on a Thursday morning in April, 2 weeks before Melissa's wedding. I was sitting in AP Literature class when my phone buzzed silently in my pocket. Mrs. Campbell was discussing the themes of betrayal in Hamlet when I carefully checked the notification under my desk. Congratulations, Sophia Morrison. You have been selected as one of 12 recipients of the Pacific Northwest Young Entrepreneurs Program Scholarship. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain the entire class could hear it. I kept my expression neutral, took notes on dramatic irony in Shakespeare, and counted the minutes until lunch break when I could properly read the full email. The scholarship covered full tuition at any participating university, a $25,000 annual stipend for living expenses, a guaranteed summer internship at Microsoft, Intel, or Nike, and access to a network of mentors throughout the Pacific Northwest business community. But the most important part was the final paragraph. Your business proposal for Bridge Educational Consulting has been forwarded to our venture capital partners for potential seed funding consideration.
I walked to the empty chemistry lab and called Aunt Margaret from the school's landline. Sophia, I was hoping you'd call today. I have some news about your trust fund application. I have news too, I said, and told her about the entrepreneurship program. There was a long pause. Then Aunt Margaret laughed, a sound of genuine delight. My dear girl, you've been busy. I'm impressed. This changes our conversation considerably. What do you mean? Well, I was calling to tell you that your trust fund has been approved and funded. But now that you've secured this scholarship, we have much more interesting options to discuss. What if, instead of just funding your education, we funded your business? She explained that she had been looking for promising young entrepreneurs to mentor and potentially invest in. My business plan had impressed not just the scholarship committee, but also several of her contacts in the venture capital world. I'd like to propose a partnership, she said. I'll provide initial seed funding for Bridge Educational Consulting, help you establish the business while you're in college, and serve as your primary mentor. Think of it as your first real entrepreneurship experience. She explained that she had been looking for promising young entrepreneurs to mentor and potentially invest in. My business plan had impressed not just the scholarship committee, but also several of her contacts in the venture capital world. I'd like to propose a partnership, she said. I'll provide initial seed funding for Bridge Educational Consulting, help you establish the business while you're in college, and serve as your primary mentor. Think of it as your first real entrepreneurship experience. By the time I hung up the phone, my life had been completely restructured. I would attend Northwestern on a full scholarship, spend summers working at major corporations, build my own business with professional mentorship and funding, and graduate debt-free with an established company and a powerful network of contacts. My family still had no idea any of this was happening. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in compartmentalization. During the day, I played the role of the dutiful daughter and supportive sister. I attended final dress fittings, helped coordinate vendor deliveries, ran errands for the wedding planner, and smiled through countless conversations about centerpieces and seating arrangements. But every evening, I worked on launching Bridge Educational Consulting. Aunt Margaret had connected me with a business lawyer who helped me establish the LLC, set up business banking accounts, and create the initial legal framework. She introduced me to a web designer who built a professional website and a marketing consultant who helped me develop my brand identity and client acquisition strategy. The week before the wedding, I received my first 3 clients, students from neighboring high schools who had heard about my services through Mrs. Henderson's network of guidance counselors. Each consultation paid $150, and within hours of posting my success stories on social media, 5 more students had booked appointments. I was making more money per hour than I had ever earned in my life, helping students navigate the exact challenges I had just overcome, and building a client base that would support my business throughout college. The wedding day arrived with typical April weather in Portland, overcast skies and the threat of rain. Melissa woke up in our parents' bedroom at 6 a.m., surrounded by bridesmaids, makeup artists, and hairstylists. The house buzzed with activity as vendors arrived to begin decorating the country club, photographers captured every moment of preparation, and Mom orchestrated the complex logistics of getting 30 people ready and transported on schedule. I performed my maid of honor duties flawlessly. I helped Melissa into her $4,000 dress, arranged her cathedral-length veil, made sure she ate breakfast, and coordinated with the other bridesmaids. I gave a heartfelt speech at the rehearsal dinner about sisterhood and family bonds. I smiled for hundreds of photographs and graciously accepted compliments on how beautiful the sage green bridesmaid dress looked on me. But throughout the entire day, I was calculating numbers in my head. The ice sculpture that would melt within hours cost more than most families spent on groceries in 3 months. The floral arrangements that would be thrown away the next day cost more than a semester of community college tuition. The 12-piece orchestra that played for 4 hours cost more than I had earned in 2 years of part-time work. Every detail of Melissa's perfect day represented choices my parents had made about whose dreams mattered and whose future was worth investing in. During the reception, as I watched 300 guests dance to the expensive band and eat gourmet dinner, I excused myself to the ladies' room and checked my business email on my phone. 2 more clients had booked consultations, including one whose parents had specifically mentioned they wanted to avoid the college funding mistakes they had seen other families make. I was building my business on the foundation of my family's poor financial decisions. The wedding was, by all accounts, perfect. Melissa looked radiant, Brandon was appropriately emotional during their vows, the weather held, and everyone agreed it was the most beautiful ceremony they had ever attended. Dad's speech during the reception brought tears to many eyes as he talked about watching his eldest daughter grow into an accomplished young woman and how proud he was to welcome Brandon into the family. He never mentioned me. 3 days after the wedding, while Mom and Dad were still recovering from the financial and emotional exhaustion of the event, I submitted my enrollment confirmation to Northwestern University, accepted my summer internship position at Nike, and signed the partnership agreement with Aunt Margaret for Bridge Educational Consulting. I also made a decision that would prove crucial to my future success. I didn't tell my parents about any of it. When they asked about my college plans, I mentioned that I was still working on some options and exploring different pathways. They seemed relieved that I wasn't pressuring them about rebuilding my college fund, especially since they were now dealing with the credit card debt and loan payments from the wedding. "We're so proud of how mature you're being about this situation," Mom said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "You're being so understanding and flexible. Not every 18-year-old would handle disappointment this well." I smiled and continued loading the dishwasher. "I've learned a lot about adaptation and problem-solving this year." "That's exactly the kind of practical attitude that will serve you well," Dad added. "College isn't everything. Look at Brandon's father. He built a successful business without even finishing his degree." What they didn't know was that I had spent the previous evening on a video call with my assigned mentor from Nike discussing supply chain management and global marketing strategies. They didn't know that I had just signed a contract with the Portland Public School District to provide college counseling services to 3 high schools. They didn't know that Bridge Educational Consulting was already generating more monthly revenue than my previous part-time jobs combined. They had no idea that their overlooked, practical daughter was rapidly building the foundation of what would become a multi-million-dollar business empire. The final 2 months before graduation passed in a blur of academic responsibilities and business development. I maintained my 4.0 GPA while secretly building my client base, completed my high school requirements while quietly establishing vendor relationships with colleges across the Northwest, and prepared for my graduation speech as class treasurer while simultaneously developing a 5-year expansion plan for my company. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, took the obligatory family photos, and expressed pride in my academic achievements. They gave me a modest graduation gift, a laptop for college, and $500 cash, and repeatedly mentioned how grateful they were that I had figured out my path without adding stress to an already difficult financial year. That evening, at the graduation party they hosted in our backyard, I mingled with extended family members, accepted congratulations from neighbors and family friends, and graciously answered questions about my college plans with vague responses about taking time to explore my options. Uncle Tom, Dad's older brother, who had always been the family's voice of practical wisdom, pulled me aside during the party. "Sophie, I've been thinking about your situation with the college fund," he said quietly. I know this hasn't been easy for you watching that money go to Melissa's wedding. If you need help getting started at community college, Linda and I could probably contribute a few $1,000s." His kindness almost brought tears to my eyes. Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda had their own financial responsibilities, 3 kids and a mortgage, but they were willing to sacrifice to help me pursue my education. "That's incredibly generous," I told him. "I can't tell you how much that means to me, but I think I'm going to be okay. I've been working on some opportunities, and I'm starting to see a path forward." He patted my shoulder. "You're a good kid, Sophie, smarter and stronger than most adults I know. Your parents don't realize what they did, but you'll find a way to make this work. You always do." As the party wound down and the guests went home, I helped clean up the backyard while my parents rehashed the evening and discussed their plans for a romantic vacation to Hawaii, their reward to themselves for successfully launching their eldest daughter into married life. That night, I sat in my room surrounded by graduation cards and gifts, looking at my acceptance letter from Northwestern, my scholarship documentation, my business incorporation papers, and the financial projections that showed Bridge Educational Consulting could be generating 6-figure annual revenue within 2 years. In 3 months, I will be leaving for Chicago to begin my freshman year at one of the most prestigious journalism schools in the country. I would be living in a luxury apartment near campus, interning at one of the most innovative companies in America, and running a business that was already changing lives for students across the Pacific Northwest. My parents still thought I was planning to attend community college and work part-time to save money for a delayed education. The deception had become so complete that I sometimes forgot they didn't know the truth. But as I packed my graduation gifts away and began preparing for the most dramatic transformation of my life, I realized that their ignorance had become my greatest strategic advantage. They had underestimated me so completely that they couldn't even imagine the scale of what I was building. And that blindness was about to become very expensive for them. Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism occupied a sleek, modern building on the shores of Lake Michigan, and from my dorm room window on the 15th floor, I could see the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was September 2019, and I was officially Sophia Morrison, freshman journalism major from Portland, Oregon. Unofficially, I was the founder and CEO of Bridge Educational Consulting, a rapidly expanding business that was already generating $30,000 per month in revenue. My roommate, Ashley Kumar, was a bright-eyed pre-med student from Dallas whose parents were both doctors. She had spent the summer before college volunteering at hospitals and taking additional science courses to prepare for the rigorous academic schedule ahead. She was everything my parents probably wished I had been: focused, conventional, following a clearly defined path to a respectable professional career. "So what made you choose journalism?" Ashley asked on our first night as roommates, as we organized our shared living space and got to know each other. "I've always been interested in investigative reporting," I told her, which was true. "There's something compelling about uncovering the truth, especially when powerful people prefer to keep things hidden." What I didn't mention was that my real education was happening every evening after classes, when I would conduct business calls with clients across 3 time zones, analyze market data for expansion opportunities, and coordinate with the team of contractors and consultants I had assembled to support Bridge Educational Consulting operations. The business had evolved far beyond my original business plan. What started as simple college counseling had expanded into a comprehensive educational consulting firm. We now offer services ranging from academic planning and scholarship application assistance to gap year program coordination and alternative education pathway development. We had contracts with 15 high schools across the Pacific Northwest, partnerships with 12 colleges and universities, and a waiting list of clients that extended 4 months into the future. Aunt Margaret had been true to her promise of mentorship, but she had also become something more valuable: a strategic advisor who understood both business development and family dynamics. During our weekly video calls, she would review my financial reports, provide guidance on scaling operations, and listen to my frustrations about maintaining the elaborate deception with my parents. "Sophia, at some point, you're going to need to decide how long you want to sustain this double life," she said during one of our October conversations.
The emotional energy required to maintain this level of secrecy is enormous, and it's only going to get more complicated as your business grows. She was right. Every conversation with my family required careful navigation to avoid revealing details about my actual life. When Dad called to ask how I was adjusting to community college, I had to remember to complain about large lecture classes and impersonal professors. When Mom asked about my part-time job, I had to invent stories about working at a local coffee shop instead of discussing my role as CEO of an expanding consulting firm. The lies were becoming increasingly elaborate, and I was discovering that deception was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. My first semester at Northwestern was academically challenging but manageable. The journalism professors were demanding, the writing assignments required sophisticated analytical thinking, and the internship expectations were rigorous. But I had been operating in high-pressure, deadline-driven environments for months through my business, so I was better prepared than most of my classmates for the intensity of professional-level work. The real challenge was time management. While other freshmen spent their evenings socializing in the dorms, attending campus events, or struggling with the adjustment to college life, I was running board meetings via video conference, reviewing client case studies, and developing expansion strategies for markets in California and Colorado. My Nike internship began in January, and it provided insights that immediately benefited Bridge Educational Consulting. Nike's approach to brand development, customer relationship management, and strategic partnerships gave me frameworks I could apply to my own business. More importantly, the internship introduced me to executives who became informal advisors and eventually investors. Janet Rodriguez, Nike's director of strategic partnerships, became a mentor who helped me understand corporate decision-making processes and large-scale market analysis. During one of our regular mentorship meetings, I made a decision that would prove crucial to my long-term success. "Janet, I want to show you something that I've been working on outside of the internship," I said, and explained Bridge Educational Consulting's business model, growth trajectory, and expansion plans. Janet spent the next hour reviewing my financial projections, market analysis, and operational procedures. Finally, she looked up with an expression of genuine surprise. "Sophia, this is sophisticated work. How long have you been building this business?" "2 years, but seriously, for about 18 months. And you're doing this while maintaining a 3.8 GPA at Northwestern?" I nodded. Janet leaned back in her chair. "I need to introduce you to some people. There are investors who specifically look for young entrepreneurs with this kind of track record and growth potential." Within 6 weeks, I was presenting Bridge Educational Consulting to a panel of venture capital investors in Portland. The presentation went better than I had dared to hope. Not only did they offer funding, but they proposed a partnership that would accelerate my expansion timeline by 3 years. The offer was for $2.5 million in Series A funding in exchange for 30% equity in the company. The partnership included access to their portfolio companies' human resources, marketing expertise, and established distribution networks. They projected that with their support, Bridge Educational Consulting could expand to 50 markets within 2 years and achieve annual revenue of $15 million by my graduation from college. I accepted the offer immediately. By spring semester of my freshman year, Bridge Educational Consulting had offices in Portland, Seattle, and Denver. We employed 43 people, including guidance counselors, education specialists, marketing professionals, and administrative staff. Our client base had expanded to include not just individual students, but also school districts, nonprofit organizations, and corporate partners who wanted to sponsor educational initiatives. The business was generating more monthly revenue than my parents' combined annual salaries. Meanwhile, my family's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. The wedding debt had been more substantial than they had initially realized, and Dad's company had reduced his territory and commission structure due to industry changes. Mom's teaching salary remained stable, but it wasn't enough to cover their mortgage, credit card payments, and the lifestyle they had maintained during their high-earning years. They had never asked about repaying my college fund. In fact, they seemed to have convinced themselves that the money had been a gift rather than a loan.
During one of our monthly phone calls, Mom mentioned that they were considering selling the house and downsizing to a smaller place outside Portland. It's just temporary, she assured me, until Dad's commission structure improves and we can get back on our feet financially. The important thing is that we gave Melissa the perfect wedding. She still talks about how magical that day was. I made appropriate sympathetic sounds while simultaneously reviewing a contract proposal that would establish bridge educational consulting partnerships with colleges throughout the Midwest.
How are your classes going? Dad asked when he took the phone. Are you managing to keep your grades up while working? I'm doing well, I told him, learning a lot about business fundamentals and strategic planning. Good, good. Practical skills are always valuable. And hey, maybe when you transfer to a four-year school, you could consider business administration instead of journalism. There's more job security in business. I agreed that business was indeed a practical field with good career prospects. The summer before my sophomore year brought new challenges and opportunities. My Nike internship had evolved into a more strategic role with greater responsibilities and a substantial salary increase. Bridge Educational Consulting was expanding into Texas and California markets, requiring more sophisticated operational systems and management structures. And I was beginning to plan for an eventual revelation to my family that would require careful timing and preparation. Aunt Margaret suggested that I should consider telling my parents the truth before my business became too large and successful for them to process emotionally. The longer you wait, she warned, the more dramatic the revelation will be. There's a difference between surprising them with your success and completely devastating them with their own irrelevance. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. My business was thriving, my academic performance was excellent, and my family was maintaining their comfortable illusions about my life and their own financial decisions. The status quo was working perfectly for my purposes. During my sophomore year, Bridge Educational Consulting achieved a milestone that made national headlines in educational industry publications. We had successfully helped 500 students secure over $50 million in scholarship funding, and our success rate for college placement was 94%, significantly higher than national averages. The publicity led to speaking engagements, consulting opportunities with major educational foundations, and acquisition interest from several larger companies. I was featured in articles about young entrepreneurs, interviewed for podcasts about educational innovation, and invited to present at conferences alongside executives from companies like Pearson Education and Khan Academy. My parents never saw any of these articles or interviews. They weren't looking for their practical daughter in the business pages of national publications. The most surreal moment came during Thanksgiving break of my sophomore year. I was home in Portland for 4 days, sitting at the kitchen table where, 3 years earlier, my family had decided to drain my college fund for Melissa's wedding. Melissa was there with Brandon, sharing updates about their new house, their career advancement, and their plans to start a family. Mom and Dad asked about my progress at community college, whether I was planning to transfer soon, and how my part-time job was going. While they talked, I received text messages from my business manager about a potential acquisition offer from Kaplan Education, notifications from my investment advisor about stock portfolio performance, and updates from my assistant about speaking engagements scheduled for the following semester. I was sitting in the same chair where I have learned that my dreams were less important than my sister's wedding, but now I was worth more money than my parents had ever seen, running a company that employed nearly 100 people and building wealth at a pace that would make me financially independent before I graduated from college. They still thought I was working at a coffee shop to pay for community college classes. That evening, as I helped Mom clean up after dinner, she put her arm around my shoulders in a rare moment of maternal affection. "Sophie, I want you to know how proud Dad and I are of how you've handled everything these past few years. You've been so mature about the college fund situation, so understanding about the family's financial priorities. Not every young person would be as gracious about putting family needs ahead of personal desires." I smiled and continued loading the dishwasher. I've learned that patience and strategic thinking usually produce better results than emotional reactions. "Exactly," she said. "You're going to do well in life because you understand how to be practical and realistic about opportunities." As I flew back to Chicago that weekend, I realized that my mother was absolutely right about one thing.
I had become extremely strategic in my thinking, but she had no idea what I was actually strategizing toward. The revelation, when it finally came, would be far more dramatic than any of us were prepared for.
The call that changed everything came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March of my junior year. I was in my apartment near Northwestern's campus, no longer the dorms, but a luxury two-bedroom I had quietly purchased 6 months earlier, working on final revisions for a merger proposal that would combine Bridge Educational Consulting with two smaller firms in Atlanta and Phoenix. The caller ID showed my parents' home number, which was unusual for any time of day, let alone the middle of the night. Sophie? Dad's voice was strained, exhausted. I'm sorry to call so late, but we need your help. I minimized the spreadsheet on my laptop screen and gave him my full attention. What's wrong? We're losing the house. The words hung in the air between us. I had been expecting this conversation for months, watching their financial situation deteriorate through careful observation during phone calls and family visits. But hearing Dad actually say it was different than anticipating it. The bank filed foreclosure papers last week, he continued. We've been behind on payments for 8 months, and they're not willing to work with us anymore. We have 60 days to come up with $43,000 or we lose everything. Mom took the phone. Sophie, we know you're working hard to save money for your own education, but we were wondering, do you have anything set aside that might help? Even a few $1,000s would show the bank we're serious about catching up. I stared out my apartment window at the Chicago skyline, calculating rapidly. Bridge Educational Consulting's quarterly revenue was now approaching $4 million. My personal compensation as founder and CEO was $75,000 per month, not including equity appreciation and investment returns. I had more money in my checking account than they were asking for to save their house. But they thought I was a community college student working at a coffee shop. How much do you think I might have saved? I asked carefully. Well, if you've been working 20 hours a week for the past 3 years, maybe you've managed to put away 10 or 15,000. Dad said hopefully. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. The irony was suffocating. They were losing their house because they had prioritized my sister's wedding over my college fund. Now they wanted me to bail them out with money they assumed I had scraped together through minimum wage work, never imagining that their practical daughter had built a multi-million-dollar business empire. Let me check my accounts. I'll call you back tomorrow. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for 3 hours, watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan and wrestling with a decision that would determine the trajectory of my family relationships for the rest of my life. I could save their house easily. One transfer from my business account would solve their immediate crisis and give them a fresh start. But doing so would require either maintaining the elaborate deception about my circumstances or finally revealing the truth about what I had accomplished. More importantly, I had to decide whether I wanted to save them from the consequences of their own choices. By 8 a.m., I had made my decision. I called Aunt Margaret first. I need to tell you about a conversation I had with my parents last night. She listened without interruption as I explained their foreclosure situation and my internal conflict about how to respond. What does your gut tell you to do? She asked when I finished. Part of me wants to let them lose the house, I admitted. They made their choices. They prioritized Melissa's perfect wedding over my education, never considering that there might be consequences. Maybe they need to experience those consequences to understand the gravity of what they did. And the other part of you? The other part remembers that they're still my parents. Whatever mistakes they made, they don't deserve to lose their home. And maybe this could be an opportunity to finally tell them the truth. Aunt Margaret was quiet for a moment. Sophia, you've spent 3 years building not just a business, but a new identity. You've proven to yourself and the world that you're capable of extraordinary things. The question is, do you want your family to know who you really are? That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls that would restructure my entire relationship with my family. First, I called the mortgage company handling my parents' foreclosure. As Sophia Chen Morrison, CEO of Bridge Educational Consulting, I had significantly more credibility than I would have as college student Sophia Morrison. I negotiated a payment plan that would satisfy their debt and reinstate their mortgage with favorable terms. Then, I called my business attorney and had him draft documents for a family loan agreement that would formalize my parents' debt to me and establish clear repayment terms. Finally, I called my parents and asked them to meet me in Portland the following weekend for a serious conversation about their financial situation. Sophie, that's so sweet of you to want to help, but honestly, unless you've discovered some miracle funding source, I'm not sure what you can do. This is really more than a college student can handle. Trust me, I told them, I have some ideas that might work. That Friday evening, I flew from Chicago to Portland, not as the struggling college student they expected, but as the CEO of a company that was about to go public with a valuation of $50 million. I had reserved a private dining room at the Nines Hotel downtown, a detail that should have alerted them that something had changed, but they seemed too stressed about their financial crisis to notice the unusual venue choice. They arrived exactly on time, looking older and more worn than I remembered. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and Mom's clothes were more conservative, less stylish than her usual choices. The strain of potential foreclosure had aged them both considerably. "Sophie," Dad said, embracing me carefully, "you look different, more professional." I was wearing a tailored black suit, designer shoes, and carrying a leather briefcase that cost more than they spent on groceries in 6 months. But they were seeing what they expected to see, their practical daughter making an effort to look adult for an important family meeting. "I had some things to show you," I said, opening my briefcase and placing several documents on the table. "But first, I need you to understand that everything you think you know about my life for the past 3 years has been incomplete." Mom and Dad exchanged worried glances. "What do you mean?" Mom asked. I placed my Northwestern University transcript on the table. 4 semesters of A's in a journalism program they thought I had never attended. Then, my Nike internship completion certificates and performance evaluations. Then, the incorporation documents for Bridge Educational Consulting. Then, quarterly financial statements showing revenue growth from $30,000 to $4 million over 3 years. Finally, I placed a bank statement on the table showing my personal account balance, $3.2 million. The silence that followed was complete. Mom stared at the documents without touching them. Dad picked up my transcript and read it 3 times before setting it down. "I don't understand," Mom said finally. "How is this possible? While you thought I was attending community college and working at a coffee shop, I was actually completing my degree at Northwestern University and building a business that now employs 127 people across 8 states." I explained everything methodically: the entrepreneurship scholarship program, Aunt Margaret's mentorship, the development of Bridge Educational Consulting, the venture capital funding, the national expansion, the upcoming IPO. "The coffee shop job was a fiction," I told them. "The community college classes were imaginary. For 3 years, while you assumed I was struggling to scrape together enough money for a basic education, I was building a multi-million-dollar company." Dad was staring at the financial statements like they were written in a foreign language. "But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling?" "Because you never asked," I said simply. "After you decided my education was less important than Melissa's wedding, you stopped paying attention to my actual life. You were so relieved that I wasn't causing problems about the college fund that you never bothered to investigate what I was actually doing." "Sophie," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we had no idea you were capable of this." "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "You had no idea what I was capable of because you never bothered to find out. You saw me as the practical daughter, the one who would understand, the one who could wait. You never imagined that I might be capable of extraordinary things." I pulled out the loan agreement my attorney had prepared. "I can save your house. I can pay off your debt, reinstate your mortgage, and give you a fresh start. But there will be conditions." They leaned forward eagerly, relief visible on their faces. "This will be a formal loan with market-rate interest," I explained. "You'll sign legal documents acknowledging the debt and committing to a repayment schedule. And most importantly, this arrangement will be based on honesty moving forward. No more assumptions about my capabilities, no more treating me like an invisible daughter."
Dad reached for the loan agreement with hands that shook slightly. Sophie, we can't believe you're willing to help us after everything that happened with the college fund. I'm not doing this for you, I told them honestly. I'm doing this because I refuse to let your financial irresponsibility define my family relationships for the rest of my life. But I want to be very clear about something. The dynamic between us has fundamentally changed. Mom was crying quietly, whether from relief or shame or both. How can we ever repay you for this? You can start by treating me like an adult whose opinions and abilities matter, I said. You can stop assuming that Melissa's achievements are more important than mine. And you can acknowledge that the practical daughter you took for granted has become more successful than any of you imagined possible. I signed the loan documents and handed them the keys to their financial survival. There's one more thing, I said as they prepared to leave. Next month, Bridge Educational Consulting is going public. The IPO is expected to value the company at around $50 million. My 60% stake will make me worth approximately $30 million. Dad's face went completely pale. 30 million? Give or take, I said casually. The exact figure depends on market conditions. As they left the hotel that evening, I sat alone in the private dining room, looking at the signed loan documents and feeling something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: complete honesty with my family. The deception was over. The careful compartmentalization of my life was finished. For better or worse, they now knew exactly who their practical daughter had become. What I couldn't predict was how this revelation would reshape our relationships, or whether they were prepared to accept the reality that their overlooked middle child had surpassed every expectation they had ever had for any of their children. The real test would come when Melissa learned what her baby sister had accomplished while she was planning the perfect wedding with money that had been meant for my education. That conversation, I suspected, would be far more complicated than anything I had just experienced with my parents. The family dinner was Melissa's idea. 3 weeks after I had rescued my parents from foreclosure, she called me directly, something that rarely happened unless she needed something. Sophie, I think it's time we all got together to celebrate your success, she said, her voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify. Mom told me about your business and everything. I had no idea my little sister was such an entrepreneur. The pause before success was telling. Melissa had built her entire identity around being the family's high achiever, the beautiful one, the accomplished one, the daughter who made the right choices and married well. Learning that her overlooked younger sister had quietly surpassed every marker of success she had ever achieved was clearly requiring some psychological adjustment. That would be nice, I replied carefully. Where were you thinking? Well, Brandon and I just finished renovating our dining room, and I thought it would be perfect for a family celebration. Nothing too fancy, just immediate family so we can all catch up properly. I agreed, though I suspected this dinner would be less about celebration and more about Melissa reasserting her position as the family's golden child. She had always been skilled at managing family dynamics to maintain her favored status, and this gathering would likely be her attempt to process the new reality where her practical younger sister had become the most successful person at the table. The dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday at 6 p.m. Melissa and Brandon's house was a showcase of young professional success. A renovated Craftsman in Portland's trendy Pearl District, decorated with the kind of carefully curated aesthetic that appeared in home design magazines. Everything from the marble kitchen countertops to the restored hardwood floors announced that the owners had money, taste, and status. When I arrived, carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, Melissa embraced me with enthusiasm that felt slightly performative. Sophie, look at you, so polished and professional. Mom wasn't exaggerating about your transformation. She was wearing a dress that I recognized from a recent Instagram post, something she had described as her celebration outfit for Brandon's latest promotion. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup was flawless, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Brandon greeted me with the kind of hearty handshake that suggested he was trying to demonstrate his comfort with successful women, though his expression suggested he was still processing the fact that his wife's younger sister had built a business empire while they thought she was struggling through community college. Sophia, congratulations on everything. Melissa's been telling me about your company. Bridge Educational something?
Bridge Educational Consulting, I corrected. We help students navigate college funding and alternative education pathways. Right. And Mom mentioned something about it being worth a significant amount? The IPO is projected to value the company at $50 million, I said casually, accepting a glass of wine from Melissa. My stake should be worth around $30 million, depending on market conditions. Brandon's wine glass paused halfway to his lips. Even though he worked in finance and dealt with large numbers regularly, hearing those figures attached to his wife's 21-year-old sister was clearly disorienting. Mom and Dad arrived shortly after, looking more relaxed than I had seen them in months. The foreclosure crisis had been resolved, their mortgage was current, and they were beginning to process the reality that their middle daughter had become the family's primary financial success story. "Sophie, you look wonderful," Mom said, studying my appearance with new attention. "That suit is beautiful. Is it new?" "It's Armani," I replied. "I had it tailored last month for some business presentations." The way she processed this information, that her daughter owned custom-tailored designer clothing, was visible on her face. For 3 years, she had pictured me wearing thrift store finds and counting every dollar. The cognitive dissonance was still challenging for her. Dinner conversation began safely enough. Brandon discussed his recent promotion to senior analyst, Melissa shared updates about her job in marketing at a local nonprofit, and my parents talked about their relief at resolving their financial crisis. But as the evening progressed, the underlying tensions became more apparent. "Sophie, I have to ask," Melissa said as we finished the main course, "how did you manage to keep this business secret for so long? I mean, building a multi-million-dollar company while we all thought you were working at a coffee shop? That must have required deception." The word deception hung in the air with deliberate weight. Melissa was probing, testing, whether she could reframe my success as somehow dishonest or manipulative. "It wasn't a deception," I replied calmly. "It was privacy. You all stopped asking meaningful questions about my life after you decided my education was expendable. I simply didn't volunteer information you weren't interested in hearing." "But Sophie," Dad interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, "surely you can understand why we're confused. If you had this kind of capability, this kind of genius for business, why didn't you say something when we were discussing the college fund situation?" This was the question I had been expecting, and I had prepared my answer carefully. Because that situation revealed something important about this family's values and priorities. You didn't ask whether I might have alternative plans or capabilities. You didn't consult me about solutions or options. You simply announced that my education was less important than Melissa's wedding and expected me to accept that decision gracefully. "Now wait a minute," Melissa said, her composure beginning to crack. "That's not fair. My wedding was important to the whole family, and you agreed to the arrangement. You can't retroactively make us feel guilty for decisions you supported at the time." "I was 18 years old," I replied. "I agreed because I had no choice and no power. But I also used that experience to motivate myself to ensure I would never be in a powerless position again." Brandon attempted to lighten the mood. "Well, it certainly worked out well for everyone. Sophie's successful, Melissa had her dream wedding, and now the family's financial situation is more secure than ever." But Melissa wasn't ready to let the conversation move toward a comfortable resolution. "I'm still confused about something," she said, her voice taking on the edge it always carried when she felt threatened. "If you were building this incredible business, why let us think you were struggling? Why not share your success with your family? It seems almost cruel to let us worry about you while you were actually thriving." The accusation was clear. I had been deliberately withholding my success to make them feel guilty about the college fund decision. "Melissa," I said, setting down my wine glass and looking directly at her, "let me ask you something. During the past 3 years, how many times did you call me to ask how I was doing? How many times did you visit me in Chicago? How many times did you show genuine interest in my life beyond whether I was handling the college situation well?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it.
The answer is zero, I continued. None of you were concerned about my actual well-being or success. You were only concerned about whether I was going to cause problems for the family by being upset about the college fund. My privacy wasn't cruelty, it was self-protection. Mom looked stricken. Sophie, that's not true. We cared about you. We were proud of how mature you were about everything. You were proud that I was quiet, I corrected. There's a difference between being proud of someone's character and being relieved that they're not causing inconvenience. The dining room fell silent, except for the ticking of Brandon and Melissa's expensive grandfather clock. Finally, Dad spoke. Sophie, what do you want from us now? How do we move forward as a family? It was a fair question, and one I had been considering for weeks. I want acknowledgement, I said. I want recognition that the family's assumptions about my capabilities and potential were wrong. I want an end to the dynamic where Melissa's achievements are celebrated while mine are taken for granted. And I want honesty about the fact that the college fund decision was about prioritizing one daughter over another, not about financial necessity. Melissa's face had gone pale. So this is all revenge? You built a business empire to prove some point about family favoritism? No, I said firmly. I built a business empire because I'm capable of extraordinary things, and because I refused to let your wedding define the limits of my potential. The family dynamics were just additional motivation. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Melissa pulled me aside in the kitchen while the others said their goodbyes in the living room. Sophie, I need you to understand something, she said quietly. I worked hard for everything I achieved. The grades, the scholarship, the job, the marriage, none of it was handed to me. And now you're acting like my wedding somehow stole your success. Your wedding didn't steal my success, but the decision to fund your wedding with my college money revealed how this family values its daughters differently. You've never had to prove your worth or fight for attention. I've had to build an empire just to be seen as equal. She stared at me for a long moment, processing the implications of what I had said. So what now? She asked. Do you expect us to treat us like some kind of family CEO because you have more money? I expect you to treat me like an accomplished adult whose achievements matter, I said, the same way you've always been treated. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the family dinner had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had forced everyone to acknowledge that our relationships would need to be rebuilt from scratch, based on who we actually were rather than who we had been assumed to be.
The golden child would have to learn to share the spotlight, and the overlooked daughter would have to decide whether she wanted to be part of a family that was finally ready to see her clearly. The next phase of our story would depend on whether any of us were brave enough for that level of honesty. Ms. Sophia Chen Morrison, Marcus announced through the intercom, your parents are here for their 11:30 appointment. I closed the manila folder containing their foreclosure documents and financial records. 2 years had passed since that family dinner, and the dynamics had shifted in ways none of us could have predicted. Bridge Educational Consulting had gone public 18 months ago at a valuation of $68 million, higher than projected. My personal net worth now exceeded $40 million, and the company employed over 300 people across 12 states. Forbes had featured me on their 30 under 30 list, and Harvard Business School had invited me to guest lecture on entrepreneurial strategy. But today's meeting wasn't about celebrating success. It was about completing a circle that began 4 years ago in our living room on Maple Street. My parents entered the conference room looking smaller than I remembered, though they carried themselves with more dignity than during our foreclosure crisis. Dad wore his best suit, the same one he had worn to Melissa's wedding, and Mom had her hair professionally styled for the occasion. Sophie, Dad said, settling into the leather chair across from me, thank you for agreeing to see us. I gestured to the documents spread across the mahogany table. I assume you know why we're here. Mom nodded, her expression resigned. We received the final notice about the loan repayment. The balloon payment comes due next month. According to the loan agreement we had signed 2 years earlier, my parents owed me $187,000, the original house debt plus accumulated interest. The monthly payments had been manageable, but the final balloon payment was designed to force a reckoning. We can't pay it, Dad admitted. We've kept up with the monthly payments, but $43,000? We don't have it.
I opened a different folder and withdrew a cashier's check, placing it face down on the table between us. There are two ways we can resolve this, I said. Option 1. I forgive the debt entirely. Consider it a gift with no strings attached. Relief flooded their faces immediately. Option 2, I continued, you sign ownership of the house over to me, and I give you this check for the current market value minus the debt you owe. You walk away with enough money to start fresh anywhere you choose. I flipped the check face up. It was made out to Richard and Patricia Morrison for $127,000. Why would we choose option 2? Mom asked, confused. Because option 1 comes with conditions, I explained. If I forgive your debt, you continue living in a house that I effectively own, in a community where everyone will eventually learn that your successful daughter bailed you out financially. You'll never escape the reality that your financial irresponsibility required rescue by the child whose education you sacrificed. The words were harsh but accurate. Option 2 gives you freedom, I continued. You can move to Arizona like you've always talked about. Start fresh in a place where nobody knows your history. Use the money to build a comfortable retirement without the shadow of past mistakes. Dad stared at the check for a long moment. And what happens to the house if we choose option 2? I'll demolish it, I said simply. Clear the lot and build something new. The house holds too many memories of being overlooked and undervalued. I'd rather start with a clean foundation. My parents exchanged glances, having a wordless conversation that spanned 32 years of marriage. There's something else we need to discuss, Mom said finally. Melissa called last week. She and Brandon are getting divorced. This wasn't entirely surprising. Melissa's marriage had been showing strain since the revelation of my success. Brandon's family, who had initially been impressed by his connection to my business empire, had gradually made it clear that they viewed Melissa as the less accomplished spouse, a complete reversal of the dynamic she had expected. She wants to know if there might be opportunities for her at your company, Dad continued. She's been struggling to find positions that match her expectations. I considered this request. Melissa had spent 2 years attempting to rebuild her identity as the family's high achiever, but her nonprofit marketing experience didn't translate well to higher-paying private sector roles. Meanwhile, my success had opened doors that she couldn't access independently. I could create a position for her, I said. Entry-level business development, good salary, opportunity for advancement based on performance. But she would be reporting to people younger than her, taking direction from colleagues who see her as the CEO's sister rather than an independent professional. Would you be willing to consider it? Mom asked. Only if she asks me directly, I replied, not through family intermediaries. If Melissa wants to work for my company, she needs to acknowledge that she's asking her younger sister for professional help. We spent the next hour discussing practical details of both options I had presented. Finally, Dad picked up the cashier's check and studied it carefully. Sophie, can I ask you something personal? I nodded. Do you forgive us? For the college fund, for not seeing your potential, for everything? It was the question I had been expecting and dreading. I forgive you for being human, I said after a long pause, for making decisions based on incomplete information and family pressures. But I don't forgive the pattern of assumptions that made those decisions feel reasonable. The assumption that my dreams were less important, that my potential was limited, that I would always be the understanding daughter who would sacrifice for others. Mom was crying quietly. We never meant to make you feel invisible. I know, I said gently, but impact matters more than intent. The good news is that being invisible taught me to see clearly. It forced me to become self-reliant in ways that ultimately made me stronger. They chose option 2. 3 months later, I stood in the empty lot where our family home had once been, watching the construction crew break ground for a new house. The design was modern, clean, forward-looking, everything the old house had not been. Melissa had accepted the entry-level position at Bridge Educational Consulting and was slowly learning to navigate a professional environment where her achievements, not her relationships, determined her success. My parents had relocated to Scottsdale, where they were building a social circle that knew them simply as retirees from Oregon, not as people who had been financially rescued by their daughter. And I was finally free to build something new on the foundation of everything I had learned about family, sacrifice, and the cost of being overlooked. The girl who had once counted pennies for college savings was now a woman who counted opportunities for transformation. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from forgiveness, but from the courage to start completely over. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.